Hello everybody and welcome to another top 5 board gaming video. Today's topic is all about the government. Now, with all of the drama that's been going on, particularly in the last few months with governments all over the world, I was kind of inspired to talk about my 5 favorite games that show governmental processes and all of these kinds of things. The thing is that the ones I'm going to be talking about are definitely skewed in the US, and so I will say that I am definitely biased in that way, but they do it in a reasonably accurate way so that you can really see how the government functions, at least in an abstract, sort of standoffish way with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor and sort of like, oh yeah, this probably happens type of thing. But of course, that said, you guys know I love to hear from you. I would love to hear your opinions about all of these games and what your personal favorites are and all of that kind of stuff. Please leave anything and everything in the comments below. The one thing I will mention is I don't want this to become a political argument, so I'm not making any sort of a stance on anything. So I'm not going to be talking about that, but just showing how these particular board games represent political processes and government in general and how it functions. But with that, we're going to just jump right on in with my number 5. At number 5, I've got Kunta. This is a game that takes place in a fictional country somewhere in like Central or South America, where essentially the idea is that one player is elected as the president and then they will distribute roles to everybody else. They will try to come up with a budget that everybody can agree with, and then everybody has particular actions that they're able to take based off of whatever roles that they were assigned. It's actually pretty interesting just in terms of how a government can function, one mechanism that it can function, but at the same time it's lower on my list because it's meant to be a little bit more satire and a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, because for example you have things where you can try to assassinate your political opponents, and while that obviously does occur in real life, it's not necessarily something that we really want to be exploiting when it comes to board games. That said, it does really show a government in action and some of the really kind of basic bureaucracy that goes on with it. So with all that, Kunta is my number 5. At number 4, I've got Mapmaker. This is an interesting game that focuses on a particularly odd aspect of US politics, which is gerrymandering. Essentially, the idea is that you're trying to map in your supporters and map out your opponent's supporters, or map everything in such a way so that in each individual county, you will have the majority of your supporters and whoever your opponents are going to have reduced representation. It's something that actually happens in US politics, and the idea of Mapmaker is that you are playing as politicians who are trying to gerrymander the map in such a way that it makes sense for you. Now, it's definitely part of the US political process in particular, but it's lower on the list because it is something that is so specific. It's a very specific aspect of politics. It is done in a reasonably well and interesting way, and I enjoy the game overall, but with all of it, Mapmaker is my number 4. At number 3, I've got Campaign Manager 2008. Now, naturally, this is another US-centric one and particularly focused on the 2008 presidential election. In this particular game, you take the role of the campaign manager, where you're going to decide on what's best for your candidate, what are you going to do as far as advertising, campaigning, where are you going to go, which states, what debates are you going to do, how are you going to answer questions, all of this kind of stuff. There's a lot of different aspects that go into this, and I find it absolutely fascinating because a good amount of data went into designing the game in such a way that it's actually realistic for what could happen in an actual presidential election. It's sort of middle of the road on this list, mostly because it's not super well known. I haven't seen it around very much, so it's kind of tough to get your hands on, but I've only played it once or twice, but the few times I have played it, it's been a lot of fun and I've really enjoyed it. Campaign Manager 2008, my number 3. At number 2, I've got Twilight Struggle. This is a wonderful game that I've talked about in several different contexts, including this one to an extent, where essentially you have one player playing as the US and one playing as the USSR during the Cold War. The idea is that this game is not a war of guns and bombs and that type of things, but it's a war of ideas. It's a war of influence, where the idea is that each player is trying to place influence on particular countries so that those countries will support them. As you get more and more support, you'll be able to earn more victory points. You're playing cards in order to try to gain and lose and move around influence, incite coups all around the world, all sorts of different stuff like this. It's a very well designed and wonderful game that integrates a lot of different mechanics, and I absolutely love it. Honestly, the only reason that it didn't hit number one for me personally is because it's a little bit abstract in terms of the actual governance aspect of it, because you're not sitting there electing new officials and stuff like that, but you definitely do have politics involved with this game 100%. Twilight Struggle, my number 2. At number 1, I've got Democra. This is the game that's all about German parliamentary politics, where the idea is that you are trying to gain seats and win support for your particular goals. Essentially, this game has everything about the political process, including the sort of shady, underhanded deals that you're trying to make. You're always constantly trying to push your own platform, but at the same time, what wins things in the end is gaining the correct amount of seats. And that's really what it's all about. It's very accurate in terms of it shows the actual number of German parliament seats. At least it did when it was first made. I don't know if it's changed. I'm honestly not certain about that. But it was meant to be a relatively accurate depiction of how things work, including some of the actual German parties that were around at the time as well. So it's absolutely amazingly well done. It's still very compelling, extremely strategic, and I absolutely love it to this day. Democra is my number 1. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 5 favorite government-themed games. Obviously, as you can see there, a lot of my games are very US themed, and of course that's because I have quite the cultural bias because I live and work in the US, and that's most of the news that I see as well. On top of that, it's most of the games that I see also. But I know that there's a lot more government board games that are based around different governments all over the world, and of course, again, it is a hot button issue, and it is an interesting thing that we can see even abstractly on the table in a board game. That said, of course, you guys know I would love to hear from you, any and all thoughts that you have in the comments below, along especially with your personal favorites in this category. What do you like? What do you not like? Do you want to keep politics out of board gaming, or do you like to see the process within your particular tabletop group? Let me know anything and everything, as always, because you guys know I love to hear it all. That said, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at my various social media pages, as well as my Patreon page. On all of those, you'll be able to interact with my channel and myself in a whole bunch of really fun and interesting ways. But with that, thank you very, very much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.